Good evening and welcome to City Council meeting for February 9th, 2021. This meeting is being conducted in accordance with emergency directives due to the COVID-19 pandemic issued by Governor Sisolak, Emergency Directive 006, and as extended or amended by subsequent emergency directives. There will be no in-person attendance as a result. Please see the posted agenda for details on these additional directives and amendments. Items listed on the agenda may be taken out of order. Two or more agenda items for consideration may be combined, and any item on the agenda may be removed or related discussion may be delayed at any time. With that, I'll call the meeting to order, and we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'll begin with our first public comment period. Public comment during this portion of the meeting is limited to matters on the agenda. Per the posted agenda, comments may have been submitted prior to the meeting, either via email or voicemail. At this time, anyone wishing to make public comment may call in. The phone number for that is 702-589-9629. Again, this is the initial public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak may call 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, were there any voicemails or emails for public comment?
Not for the initial one.
Thank you. Again, this is our initial public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak on items on the agenda, the phone number is 702-589-9629. All right, hearing no one, we will close the initial public comment period. Move to the approval of the regular agenda. Any changes, Madam City Clerk?
No changes.
Madam City Attorney?
No changes.
Mr. City Manager?
No changes.
Council, any changes? Anyone wishing to make a motion for approval?
Motion to approve the regular agenda.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. We'll move to the approval of the consent agenda. Madam City Clerk? Madam City Attorney?
No changes.
And Mr. City Manager?
No changes.
Thank you. Council, any changes?
Mayor, I'd ask that item number 2 be moved to the regular agenda.
Thank you. Any other changes? Councilmember Folda, would you like to make the motion then?
Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda with changes.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We'll move then to item number 2, Resolution 7226, closing certain capital projects and placing that funding in a reallocation account within the Special Projects Fund to be available for future allocation. Mr. Littoral?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Keegan Littrell for the record, your Public Works Director. Item number 2 is asking to reallocate a number of projects that have either been completed or other priorities have taken precedent. You'll see in the packet that there are 2 spreadsheets. The first spreadsheet is for utility projects, and then the second one is for the general fund, the special projects. Each of these projects, if this is approved, when they're reallocated for utility projects, they'll stay in the utility fund for the specific utility. The city manager's report that you guys see at the end of every month, it'll be designated on there. You'll see a new line item at the bottom saying this is the reallocated funding. The first month it might be a little bit different, just showing where the funding came from. But for the special projects funds, it's a little bit different. Any of them that came from either the surcharge or voter approved or the residential construction tax, the surcharge and the residential construction tax will actually go back into those funds at the end of the year. But the voter approved will not be moving back to the voter approved account. It'll actually stay in the special projects funds if it can be reallocated towards or be used towards a project that, like infrastructure. CIP1 is for infrastructure. If there's an infrastructure project that we can use it for, that's what it will be allocated towards. But you'll see all that on your city manager's report at the end of every month, showing exactly where the funding's going, just trying to be transparent, because if we show you your big spreadsheet for $10 million and all of a sudden there's a couple million missing, there's going to be a lot of questions. So we want to, Ms. Lellis will, when she generates that report at the end of the month, you'll be able to see where that funding is going. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just brought this one off because I wanted to have that stated. And, in the past, we've been talking about this a lot, trying to have the CIP money that was allocated kind of followed, where the money is going. And so this, I think, is a good tool to be able to see, if there's a project that was changed or had leftover funding or had, decided to not do that project, where does the money go from there on? Because I think in the past it was still moved around but used towards other projects and this, and this is, I think, give us a little bit better idea of how many projects there are, how many monies are out there that are in that situation, and then where they're being held in the meantime. So I appreciate that explanation and just wanted to bring it forward for everyone to benefit.
To add one other thing to that, at the bottom of the spreadsheet, you'll see the reallocated funding. If there is a project that council would like to see move forward or that staff would like to move forward with, we can bring an agenda item forward asking for permission to use a portion of that reallocated funding to proceed with that project, just as we do with any other project, but we'll also be asking to use some of that reallocated funding. So I think it's a lot clearer picture for moving forward.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, I would just like to say thank you for bringing that up, Councilwoman Folda. This is something we've been waiting for a long time. very happy to see it. I think everyone will be happy to be able to understand maybe a little bit more clearly exactly where it is. So I thank both of you and Carol for all the work you've done.
Any other questions or comments? Again, I also appreciate the effort to clarify this. You know, over the years, it had gotten so far out of balance that it appeared that there was $20 million that wasn't really accounted for, but as you looked into it, you could see things had been rolled over and that. I am concerned, though, about voter-approved projects specifically, that if a project goes to the voters and they are asked to approve a certain amount and the project comes in under that amount, to not return that money to the CIP fund and put it aside in this other fund and say, well, the voters had approved it for that purpose, but we're going to put it over here, and in the future we may decide to use it somewhere else. I'm troubled by that type of process, to be able to do that if we've asked the voters for specific approval.
Yeah, I can try to make that a little bit more clear. I wasn't clear in the first time. The way it was explained to me, at least for capital improvement number one, the voter approved number one, that's $1 million for infrastructure. That can be used for any type of infrastructure project that we do. So that $1 million is moved at the beginning of the year and applied towards infrastructure projects. Like you said, if a project comes in under $1 million, I'll just use 900,000 as an example, and there's 100,000 left over. At the end of the year, if there's no other infrastructure projects that we do, that instead of moving that 100,000 back to the CIP and then moving $1 million the next year, the way it is right now, we leave the 100,000 and only move 900,000. So you're not moving a new $1 million every year. It's $1 million minus what wasn't spent from the previous year.
I appreciate that clarification. As I look at the resolution, though, I'm not sure that that's clear within the resolution that that's the intent.
Do you have an answer to that, Carol? You know the finances.
And I'll be honest with you, having read the resolution, I'm not sure specifically how we can make that clear, other than to just say that if it's voter-approved money and it's not used, then, you know, it goes back towards the voter-approved fund rather than into a separate fund that can be used at any discretion later on.
Does that go back to the original resolution for the voter-approved money?
Yeah, this resolution is asking for these projects to be reallocated, as far in the fact that in the special projects fund, it will be designated separately, and it'll show not only on the bottom of the CIP every month, it'll actually in the fund balance in the city manager's report, it'll show the balance of that, the reallocation account that she's opened, that finance has opened. So that resolution is asking for these projects to be reallocated. It may, as far as the structure that's been in place that's been used each year to take, even if they weren't reallocated, let's say a project didn't go at the end of the year that was voter approved, then at that point in the past, it was transferred back over into the voter approved fund. That's more of a process each year that's being done that I think can be addressed as that process, I think, separate than the reallocation that we're asking for. So if you would rather see that's something finance, it would be addressed with finance if you would rather see the $1 million being transferred over at the beginning of the year and whatever not getting used being transferred back. Or like Mr. Luttrell said, if it's the balance not used is just subtracted out of the $1 million, it would be transferred the next year. So to me, I think that's more of a finance process a little bit different than what we're asking for on this resolution. But that,
And again, I understand what you're saying, and, my concern is still, is it clear to the public that, the deal was that there would be $1 million that was voter approved.
correct.
And if, we're doing things and saying, well, this year we did this, so we're only gonna transfer, 887,000, and next year it'll, it's some other amount, and then it all goes into one account and starts getting mixed, and I understand what you're saying, you're not mixing it, but I'm just not sure that it's real clear that way to the public that they approved the $1 million, and if we show different amounts each year. I understand there's an explanation for it, and I understand that may be best for your accounting processes, but I'm not sure that it answers everything for the public each year. So is it possible on your spreadsheet that you can show specifically that these are being broken out, that there's some amount that goes to the voter approved transfer versus the other money that is available?
Correct. And similar, if this gets approved, then when they actually are reallocated, on my monthly CIP report, they'll move to the bottom, and it'll say a separate space on the bottom that says, these have been reallocated, so that the money and the total balance of that will tie back to the account balance on the city manager accounting. So you'd be able, and I break down, just like on here, I break down the funds. So it shows on here what is on the surcharge. Yeah. On each project.
Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so I probably put them on the spot by asking where exactly the counting of where the money will go.
I asked yesterday too,
So the, because on your spreadsheet, right, I mean, that's something you're creating, but I think what we should do and discuss then, as we go through the budget process of having finance, if that's something that we want permanently, I mean, for this is just accounting for the CIP spreadsheet, but I think if that's something we permanently want, that we should talk about that during the budget process and have finance really spell out how money is being moved back and forth amongst accounts. So I think that would be probably the best for this and this situation.
Madam City Attorney, do you have any comment regarding the wording of the resolution?
No, Mayor, I would just say that, the city charter is very clear, and capital improvement funds expenses have to be approved by the voters. So, those funds can only be used as approved by the voters. So any resolution that violated that would not be effective. And I read this resolution, I don't believe there's any conflict with the city charter. I think this simply allocates the funding, reallocates the funding from projects that I believe are funded from several different sources to a special projects fund. I don't believe there's any conflict with the city charter there.
Any other questions or comments? Would you like to make a motion, Councilmember Folda?
Yes, I will move to approve Resolution 7226.
Second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you both for the explanations on that. All right, we'll go to item number 4, a presentation by Lisa Foster on the 2021 legislative session. Mr. Mays?
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. As our City Clerk calls Lisa Foster, I just wanted to provide a brief overview of the intent for tonight's presentation. So Foster Consulting has been hired by the city to represent Boulder City during the 2021 legislative session. And Lisa Foster will be providing a presentation to the council tonight, and this is an opportunity for the council to ask questions on the legislative process and any of the highlights so far during the legislative session that she's observed as she's representing the city in Carson City. So.
Hello, this is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. It's Lou. You're up.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me know if you have any problems hearing me or if there's any feedback, and I'll try to make a change.
You sound good.
Okay, here we go. Thank you so much. Good evening. I'm Lisa Foster, principal with Foster Consulting. Looks like I need to mute my computer here. I'm Lisa Foster, principal with Foster Consulting. I'm sorry my team and I haven't had the chance to meet you, Mr. Mayor or Council, in person. Fortunately, we have met Mr. Mays and Ms. Walker prior to the pandemic. As a brief introduction, I began lobbying in the 1990s as a staff lobbyist for local government. I've lived and worked in both northern and southern Nevada. Working with me is Ms. Mary Brzezinski, the former Carson City School Superintendent, who's been with me for 10 years, and Ms. Aubrey Thomas, a recent graduate who will be attending law school this fall. She is primarily our bill tracker. I thought I'd talk a little bit about how we communicate with your staff and the analysis of bills, discuss the process of this unusual legislative session, and then hit on some of the issues or bills we have seen or will likely see during the session. Nevada's 81st session begins February 1st. There's a 120-day limit, so the final day is May 31st. There are a number of deadlines by which bills must be passed out of committees and houses, so it gets a little frantic during those times. There have been 900 bills requested for drafting, and about 210 of these have been introduced. We've already been discussing some of these bills with your key staff. We send bills to the relevant department manager and keep the city manager and attorney in the loop. We will be meeting weekly with other city lobbyists and the League of Cities to discuss legislation. In fact, we've started that today. If a bill impacts all cities in either a negative or positive manner, the League will be working to fight, amend, or support the bill. Other cities, and it's primarily the larger cities, will also weigh in directly. And there may be times when it's appropriate for Boulder City to testify as well. An example may be if a bill is directed just to Clark County entities, or if it deals with utilities that other cities do not provide. In this case, it's important we communicate with individual committee members, give committee testimony, or both. To explain how the legislature is operating this session, it is completely virtual. The committees meet by Zoom, and those wishing to express their opinion may call in and speak over a dedicated phone line. They have a 2-minute limit per speaker. The legislative building is completely closed to anyone but legislators, key staff, and approved reporters. This system is unusual, but we are using our best efforts to manage it. As I'm sure you know, for a bill to become a law, it has to be passed out by a majority of members of a committee it was assigned to, and then the full House. And then that process is, of course, repeated in the second House in Nevada bicameral. The governor then has the power to sign it into law, allow it to become law without a signature, or veto it. After State Department heads were forced to cut considerable dollars out of their budgets, the legislature is now working with an $8.7 billion budget from the governor that is $187 million less than his last proposed budget in 2019. The money committees work daily to cut proposals and create their final budget. We've already tagged nearly 50 of the 200 bills that have been introduced for Boulder City. Most have little impact, but there are a few we have had some concerns with and know that others can be amended in a negative way. There are typically about 1,100 bills introduced each session, and usually local governments are impacted by more bills than any other interest group. We usually track or lobby about 250 to 300 for Boulder City. Let me give you a quick update on some of the important issues. I'll begin with the State Railroad Museum in Linear Park. The museum is on a list of projects that may receive funding from AB 84 of the 2019 session, which allowed for the rollover of the conservation path 2 decades ago. I'm meeting this week with Assemblywoman Thompson, who chairs the money committee that approved the bill, to see what the status and the next steps are. I've also spoken to the deputy director of the department that oversees the bond, and Mr. May sent him updated information on the museum. I will keep your staff apprised as to the status. Next, I wanted to update you on the League of Cities, which you're a member of. The organization no longer has a contract lobbyist, but this function will instead be handled by the director Wesley Harper. The League has 3 bills. AB 3 allows for the electronic submission of land use maps and related documents. And AB 63 expands the use of money from the local government's emergency fund. These first 2 bills will be presented in a hearing on Friday. The third bill, SB 64, proposes changes to the formula for calculating property taxes. NACO, the Association of Counties, has its own property tax bill, but it's smaller in its effect. I believe some information on these bills is included in your packet. The League and NACO have been meeting to negotiate a compromise, and Applied Analytics has been hired by both those groups to evaluate the true effect these bills would have on government budgets and on property owners. Additionally, the 4 largest cities in Nevada have joined together to hire a lobbyist for the issue. Currently, all lobbying on this bill has been paused until the data is received from the analysts. Another topic that will be dealt with this session are bills related to peace officers, whether it's dealing with their authority, their liability, or other issues. It's traditional that cities and counties primarily rely on the Sheriffs and Chiefs Association to speak on their behalf as one voice, except for Metro, which also has its own lobbyist. The League director will be speaking with the Sheriffs and Chiefs director, and then they'll be speaking with the League members to see how to best deal with these bills when they arrive. Since the session just began a week ago, most of the bills haven't been too much of a concern for the city, especially with some of the amendments that have been agreed to. However, we're tracking more than 300 additional bill draft requests for Boulder City, and those only tell us a sentence of what the bill is about. Some of the other issues that may be addressed through these bills include utility issues that could have a tremendous impact on your residents, election issues that we usually have to weigh in on at the charter city, and other changes in tax policy that could impact cities. And though Boulder City has previously had to fight that sometimes return, include ones that try to change your slow growth ordinance, bills that deal with your non-gaming position, and bills that can affect solar leases. So we watch for any of these bills very specifically. Overall, though, the legislature is consumed with attempting to deal with a budget that's really been worse than most any other state in the COVID crisis. This will take much of their time as they move money around and search for new resources, such as the mining tax that was discussed over the summer, and they'll be taking up again. We want you to know we're always available should you have questions at any time during the session. And I'd really like to just thank you once again for giving us the honor of representing Boulder City before the legislature. I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Foster. Any questions from council? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation. I was curious in in one of the things that was sent, AB 58 regarding authority and changes to the authority and duties of the Attorney General. You did list that as having potential concerns. I was wondering if you were able to elaborate on that at all a little bit and how that might impact Boulder City.
I would need to look that up real quick. It's one of the many bills. I don't want to punt to the city attorney. However, she may be interested in speaking on that bill. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Otherwise, I will look it up and give it some thought here.
Thank you, Lisa. So the AB 58, the document that was provided to you are comments from city staff. And so Chief Shea did review that bill. Essentially, AB 58 just, it gives the Attorney General oversight over police brutality cases. And so there are some concerns with the scope of that authority in the bill. It's our understanding that the Attorney General is going to be making some amendments to make this bill acceptable to all of the law enforcement entities. And so we don't think there will be issues, but if the bill is passed as written, there are some concerns for our police department.
I believe that's one the sheriffs and chiefs have been discussing in great detail.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to thank you for the presentation and the documents. I started reading the Gwynn report and it was giving me a headache, trying to wrap my mind around the discussion of property taxes and it seems like the tax schemes are pretty complicated and seem to greatly affect our education system. Can you explain to me, is it, I'm trying to see the one that I was just looking at. Isn't that SB 10? The reforming the property tax?
Did you just mention the NACO property tax bill?
Yes, the NACO property tax bill, please.
Yes, and I think that there was a pretty good description in the document you received. It is extremely complicated. That bill deals primarily with the caps that were put in place in the, I believe, 2005 session, which is if property values on a residential property increase by more than 3%, that there's a cap of 3%, and this bill deals with that. And then if it's commercial property, the cap has been 8%, and they're trying to address some of those caps in a way that won't be completely disastrous for property owners. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you this, until they get the data from Applied Analytics that both NACO and the league have split the cost of the lobbying on these issues have really been put on hold, because I don't think that there is a real clear understanding of what these bills can do to, for instance, a senior who's on a fixed income, either of these bills. And so the only reason I'm hesitant to say this is exactly what this bill is going to do, I think we need to get examples from the company that's been paid to say, this is how property owner A would be affected if the NACO bill was passed. This is how property owner B would be affected if the league bill was passed. And like you said, it is very complicated.
Okay, thank you.
And that wasn't a great answer. I know that. And I'm hoping that Jeremy Aguero is supposed to provide that data by the end of the week. And what I'd like to do is work right with your city staff. We had quite a meeting about it with the League of Cities today, and they are not lobbying legislators on either of these bills. I think they had in the past, both NACO and the League, but right now it has really been stopped because there needs to be a better analysis as to what the true impact would be. We know the impact of the caps has been very difficult for local government, and because Nevada has such an unusual formula in how property taxes are calculated, and the caps were put in place because people with such income as the property values increased could not afford to pay for their property tax bills. So they put the caps in place, but then there was no way to alleviate the problems that it has caused local government. So this has been an ongoing problem, and when we get the analysis from Jeremy that they've paid for, hopefully we will come to some resolution between the League and NACO that will not be a disaster for those that we thought it might be a disaster for the previously.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That's all.
And if I might just add just to that conversation just a little bit, since I do serve on the League of Cities, it's something that has been discussed at a couple of the meetings. This really in the last week is the first time I've ever actually seen any language at all. But really it does come. I think she did a pretty good job of explaining that, it has been really hard for a lot of the cities out there with revenues and everything, and with COVID and everything, it really exacerbated it. So I think the attempt is to try and address these revenue issues that so many of these smaller cities, a lot of municipalities have been facing, and so it's I'm happy to hear they're doing a lot more work on this, because there's have been a lot of questions, but it's been difficult for me just in these meetings to wrap my head fully around it, because there's not a lot of information. There's a desire there, but there's not. It's been really hard to piece together the way to actually make it work for everybody. And so I am glad to hear that it's something that they're looking into. But I just wanted to make sure, since I serve on the board, that I update you guys on the conversations that have been had. They haven't been incredibly in depth, other than the problems that the cities are having, how they are trying to address them.
Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, Lisa, thank you so much for your presentation. And I also was concerned with SB 64, with the formula for the taxes. I've lived in many different states, and it's really gotten to the point where people can't live in those states anymore because of the tax structure. So I'm very concerned with getting a little more information concerning that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fulda?
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for the updates. I know it's really early on, and so a couple ones that I was interested in was AB 42. This has been talked around in the courthouses for a little while now. I think I've heard about it about 2 years maybe, and this is where potentially we could have trials by jury in Boulder City, and so that's something that would be a different thing that we haven't had before. It was already brought up at AB 58 with the duties of the Attorney General, and how it would affect our police department. And then additionally, like the SB 13 is not as hard for us. That's the budget fund balance. I think Las Vegas brought that forward to change what their fund balance was. It was just changed, I believe, to 16, so we reduced ours, and now they're trying to get it back up to 25. So that one should just be kind of interesting as we follow the budgets and how that would affect collective bargaining. Lisa, you did say the State Railroad Museum and Linear Park. I know that was not in a previous session. Is that the same? What is the number, or is there anything brought up this session for that?
Last session, every city that's the size of Boulder City gets a bill if they want to use it. So last session, the city used their bill to request an appropriation, and that's a very unusual way of using a bill. Just so you know, they're usually policy bills that cities bring forward. So it didn't pass. But what I can say is that what I mentioned earlier is that the train museum is included in the bond rollover list of projects. Okay. And I spoke with the deputy director of conservation the other day, and he said, that it's on the list. He wants us to keep him apprised. We gave him the updated information. He knew exactly what we were looking for. And we're just going to keep bothering him. And then I believe Thursday, when I speak with Assemblywoman Carlson, I will get a little bit more information as to what we need to do to stay on the list to get some of the state funding from that bond. This is not from the general fund. This is from the rollover of the bond, and there is money in that pot.
Okay. Thank you for that update.
And I couldn't hear your question completely. I may have missed something as you talked about some of those bills. If you want to ask me again on some of those bills, I'll try to hear it a little bit better.
So I'll just give you the numbers. Not really questions, but the ones that are kind of, I think, would affect Boulder City a little more. AB 42, which could do trial by jury, which we haven't done before. AB 58, which Councilmember Adams brought up with the duties of the AG and how that would affect potentially our police department.
Yes.
SB 13 is the budget fund balance change, which wouldn't would affect the collective bargaining as far as when we're doing budgeting. Those were the ones that caught my eye, at least.
Okay. I hear all your bills now. Thank you for pointing out what you feel is important, and you're very right. They're all very important, Boulder City. The one, AB 42, that was part of a discussion today when we had the league lobbyist meeting, and the city of Henderson put that forward. And there's still a lot of questions about just how far down this bill reaches beyond domestic violence issues. So we're still kind of looking at that bill, and I could provide an update for you. And definitely, as it gets scheduled, we will, I probably, because I'm not involved with Boulder City in between sessions, kind of get from your staff where Boulder City has been on this issue in the last year. So our discussion tonight makes me aware of needing to know kind of where you have been on that issue, of the jury case issue on this. So. And then on the bill 58, it's my understanding that the Attorney General has agreed to remove a portion of that bill that has caused so much heartburn. But bills change. Bills change all the time. Even if something is taken out, sometimes it gets put back in. And so thank you for saying that that's an important bill. It's a very important bill. There'll be a lot more important bills dealing with law enforcement, social justice, liability for police officers, for cities. There'll be more bills coming our way.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Foster, I would also like to thank you. This is Mayor McManus. I know that the city has been working with you for a number of years now, and you're very familiar with, how we intend to proceed on things. So I appreciate you looking out for those particular bills up there. Certainly, I give a lot of support to that funding from last session for the Railroad Museum. I think that's a very critical project for our city. With the AB 42 jury trials, I think one of the things that most concerned communities was that this would require jury trials at the municipal level, and that would entail additional cost as those jurors were paid for. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly been the concern. Yes.
Okay. A couple of things, obviously, too, that I know you're aware of, but I just want to make clear. When many of these bills go through the legislature, as you had mentioned before on utility companies, for instance, they're always thinking about NV Energy or Sierra Power or the large ones. So when those bills get passed, those laws may still apply to us. So that's critical for us to also keep in mind, too, that these large entities get all the attention, but they could certainly have impacts on us as well.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Those utility bills, whether it's energy or waste or any other utility that really other cities don't have to deal with directly, can affect Boulder City in such a tremendous fashion. And legislators, for the most part, I mean, we have one assemblyman in Boulder City, we have one senator in the area. They're not aware. I mean, your own folks are aware of those issues, but other legislators really are not aware of how Boulder City operates. And so I pay special attention to those utility bills because you're right. Those are the ones that can really hurt your residents if no one's watching them.
Yes, thank you. And again, I appreciate all the work you've done on behalf of the city in the past and continue to do for us. Sometimes the little guys get lost in the shuffle, so thank you for looking out for our interests.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to represent you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, Ms. Foster, I'm sure you're looking forward to the next 4 months. It's always entertaining up there in Carson City, so thank you for your assistance.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, we'll move then to item number 5, Resolution 7227, approving a final map for Unit 3 of Boulder Hills Estates. Mr. Mays?
Boulder Hills Estates is a 127-lot subdivision at Bristol, Cone, and Adams. You can see the map reference on the screen showing the entire subdivision. The tentative map for this subdivision was approved by the City Council in February of 2018. You'll see by the map that the colors indicate the 3 phases to the subdivision project. Storybook Homes, the developer of the subdivision, is seeking council approval this evening for the 3rd and final phase of the development. This is what we refer to as the final map. And this phase, which is at the southern end of the development, constitutes 40 lots of the development. And with that, I can answer any questions about the proposal.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. Earlier I'd asked about the variances and received a response that of the number of variances that were used versus provided. Do you want to, could you reiterate some of that information that you provided to City Council?
Sure. So there were several variances that were approved with this development. At the time of the consideration, the developers didn't know how many of those variances would be needed. The most significant one was because of the lot configurations, they sought and received an approval to have up to 75% of the homes allow for the front yard setback to not be the required 20 feet, but could be as close as 15 feet from the property line, provided that garages always maintain a 20-foot setback, obviously to accommodate vehicles within the driveways. So far, the development has had approximately half of the lots utilize that provision. If every remaining lot that has not been built yet was to utilize that variance, it would still meet the maximum number of 75%. The other variances that have not been utilized fully relate to RV garages, both in terms of lot coverage, allowing for up to over 43% of the lot coverage if they're providing an RV garage on that lot, as well as reducing the overall side yard setbacks. Normal side yard setbacks is 20 feet for both sides of the property. So this is between the structure and the side lot line on each side. Reduced it down to 16 to accommodate these RV lots, and that has not been used because there just haven't been that many RV garages that have been built within the development.
Thank you. If later on the resident wanted to add an RV garage, would they have to get a new variance, or would that be grandfathered with this?
The variance is approved with the development, so that opportunity would exist.
Okay, so at some point there could be, with more garage, if that's what the resident chooses to build, there could be potentially more.
Correct.
Okay. The other thing that addresses, I don't know if we put the map back up. This final map will probably have the biggest impact on the neighbors to the east and south. Can you address how maybe staff and Storybook will be working to minimize their impact, the construction impact on those residents?
Certainly. Early on in the process with the tentative map consideration, one of the things Storybook did is they did outreach to the adjacent property owners to make sure that their development was being a good neighbor to those neighbors to the south and to the east. One of the provisions as part of the tentative map, which has followed through with the final map plans for Phase 3, is ensuring that there's retaining walls at the southern end of the development and a block wall that will help with the separation between the developments. Storybook, as well as city staff, have worked with the adjacent property owners. One of the things that, of course, will be a concern, particularly for the property owners at the extreme north end of their development, the south end of Storybook, is as construction occurs within Phase 4, minimizing the impacts on those neighbors to the south. Putting that wall in first will help to mitigate those efforts. Certainly staff will be working both with the developer and the adjacent neighbors to minimize those impacts.
And it's my understanding currently the south neighbors that are already in existence, they have a 6-foot wall already in existence, right? How much higher will they have but Storybook will be above and grading above them. So how much higher of a wall will that create in their backyards?
So you're correct about their block walls. What will be roughly the retaining wall along the southern property line for the Storybook development is going to be between 3 and 5 feet. And then in addition to that retaining wall, there will be the standard 6-foot block wall on top of that. So you're looking at the neighbors to the south seeing a wall rising up between 3 to 5 feet above that.
And what will be in between? Will there be an alleyway or a gutter, or what's the separation between the retaining wall and the existing wall there?
There's a couple of things that are taken into consideration. First is the foundations for the new walls. making sure that they do not adversely impact the existing walls. The existing walls were not meant to be retaining walls. And so there has to be that separation back to make sure that there aren't any negative impacts. That's part of what our city staff has been evaluating as we've been working with the developer. In terms of what ultimately will be the gap, that's something that we're talking to them now. We need it to have structural integrity, but at the same time, we don't want it to be a gap that can cause problems later on as a place that, trash could collect and other measures. So we're looking at that item.
Okay. That would be something I'm interested in the future of what that becomes and how it's going to affect. And same what you're bringing, those points that you're bringing up, if that's going to be an area of, people hiding or trash collecting or just a weed area, what does that become? I would be interested to know that as that develops. Thank you.
Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, this is probably an outside issue, but on talking about landscaping, and probably because I sit on the Southern Nevada Water Authority board, the zoning ordinance does not have landscape requirements for R1 zones. Are there any landscape requirements in terms of public areas, areas where nobody walks? The only person, what do they say? The only person who walks on it is the person who mows the lawn. So are there any requirements at all? And everybody could have a green lawn in the front.
Yeah, so with our current zoning for single-family homes, there are no minimum landscaping requirements. One of the things that we have been evaluating is to bring before the City Council proposed amendments to our city code that are drought tolerant and sensitive to our climate. Because in the past, one of the things, particularly for multifamily development, that our code encourages is the use of sod. It actually gives points for sod for multifamily developments. And so we want to address that with the City Council.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? It's been brought up in the past as far as how this development came about, that this is the third sale of land that will occur. I know I had spoken with Madam City Attorney previously about this. With this sale of the land, where are the proceeds going to go?
The majority of the proceeds will go toward capital improvements, and I believe 10% for public safety, but I would have to verify that.
Okay. And that's according to previously approved initiatives?
The voter approval for the sale of Tract 349, yes.
Okay. Which I think was back in 2010 or somewhere around there.
Yeah.
A concern that I've always had about this project is, and as this finishes out now, is the runoff from the development. And, I understand that the tentative map was approved and all that. I think the city is at significant risk, and clearly, apparently our hands are tied on this. But there are no provisions for stormwater runoff from this subdivision. There is one, I believe it's one storm channel that's about halfway up the eastern side of the development that collects from that upper half and simply puts the water out onto Bristlecone. With this sale, there will now be a street for the lower half that I suspect will be a collector for stormwater that will also put water out onto Bristlecone. I appreciate what Storybook has done with this development. But this is not the way we should be doing developments in Boulder City, where those types of things are not looked to understand the impacts that they're going to have on the community, because eventually somebody's going to have to take care of that water. And the way this was designed, it's not going to be the people doing the development. So I have a real concern about that, but again, these agreements were signed some time ago and nothing was put in there, so we are where we are today. I would look to the future if anything happens with Track 350, which is the land around Boulder Creek Golf Course, that we not do that again, or at least have some type of forward planning for it. Any other questions or comments? Anyone wishing to make a motion then on resolution number 7225? Or, excuse me, 7227.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 7227.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Mays. We'll move to item number 6, Resolution 7228, lease agreement with one of the airport hangars.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. This is Acting City Attorney Brittany Walker. Before you is Resolution 7228. This resolution would approve of a lease agreement assigning the ground lease, specifically hangar TW321 of the leased premises from William and Viola Mossop's Living Trust to In Motion Media Group LLC. The ground lease underlying this hangar was originally entered into by the city in 1998. It was for several properties known as pads 4, 5, and 6 that hangars were constructed on. In 1999, a portion of the lease was assigned, specifically hangar TW321, to William and Viola Mossop Living Trust. There was a option to extend the lease for an additional 10 years, and that was exercised, and so the trust extended the lease, and it now expires November 30th, 2028. This assignment would assign this lease to a new owner. The new hangar, or lessee I should say, is aware that the lease expires by its very terms on November 30th, 2028, and is aware of all their obligations under the lease. Any questions?
Questions or comments? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, just for the record, I asked the question yesterday in the briefing, and Marissa answered it, and I asked if they were going to be using aviation equipment within the building, and she said she'd already had all of the paperwork filled out and everything, so that I was concerned with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I would just also add that these are not normally brought before council. Most of these leases have an amendment that had been approved by a prior city council, which delegated the assignment of responsibilities to the real estate officer. This particular lease does not have such an amendment, and that's why it's before you today.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Folda?
I just would ask Councilmember Hoskins, could you clarify? I don't know if I understood what you just stated, that a business would be operating out of the hangar?
I can clarify. During the briefings, Councilwoman Hoskins asked whether the hangar would be used for aviation purposes. Under the lease, the permitted use is for aviation purposes, and we've confirmed that the new owner does have an aircraft, and we have information on that aircraft, and the hangar will be used for storage of that aircraft.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Madam City Attorney, again, I appreciate the clarification about when these do come to City Council. Clearly, this has been a contentious issue about these. We may need to relook at those leases to see if those discussions need to occur, to have city council look at each of these leases as we're doing with this tonight. It does look like the process has been made very clear to the people that are involved in these changes in the lease ownership or lease benefits. Again, I'm assuming this lease also contains a reversion clause so that in 2028, the clause states that any structures on the property would revert to city ownership.
Thank you, Mayor, for the question. Yes, this lease, particular lease on this hangar, does have a reversion clause which requires the lessee to essentially quit claim deed all the right, title, and ownership to the property to the city upon termination, as well as all improvements and appurtenances.
Okay, and I noted in the packet that airport staff has gone over those terms, has had the new leasee initial off, and is aware of those provisions in this lease and the other leases as well.
That's correct, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, anyone wishing to make a motion on Resolution 7228?
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 7228.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. We'll move then to item number 7, Resolution 7229, requiring the City of Boulder City to record audio and video of all public meetings taking place in accordance with NRS Chapter 241. Councilmember Adams had requested this. Mr. Adams, any questions or comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to make some comments, I guess. I do want to be clear for the public's sake and for everyone's information that this resolution would not change or alter the current video services that we're providing. It wouldn't add any additional burden to city staff or our finances. But what it does do is it makes very clear, states by policy, by city policy, that we are committed to providing video services for our public meetings, which also allow for the potential for closed captioning, which can be a great benefit for access for members of our community who may be deaf or hard of hearing. I think it's important to note that currently these services are being provided by administrative action, and I think it's really important that the city itself commits to this policy so that should there ever be any interest in eliminating them or otherwise diminishing the services in any real way, that decision would come back before council and therefore allow the public the opportunity to speak up and to offer their opinions on that matter. Certainly it's not a comprehensive approach to all the different ways in which accessibility might be an issue for some in our community, but I'm hoping that this is a good first step for the city so that we can just ensure that we are moving in the direction of increasing accessibility to our public meetings. Especially now, I think we've all realized how important having this is. So, we have the staff to do this, we have the equipment to do this. I just want to make sure we have the commitment from the city now.
Any questions or comments? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. I do want to say that I appreciate Councilman Adams for bringing these forward. It's been, I think, a benefit to have the recordings of not only city council meetings, but our various commissions and committees as well. It gives opportunity to people that can't make it at that hour to be able to watch it at their own leisure. What I did have a question on is the retention period. I know NRS requires a certain retention period for recordings of city council meetings. What would be the plan for retention of these recordings?
If it's hosted on another platform, we have our own recordings that we have custody and control of, and the minimum retention period for all public meetings is 3 years. So we keep our own, because if it's on a platform such as YouTube or our vendors, it's no longer our property or under our custody and control. So we make our own, and it's a 3-year retention period.
Okay. For those that are going off onto the platform, like we use a YouTube channel for Boulder City, is the plan to keep them indefinitely on there, or what is the plan as far as our YouTube channel?
Well, so far, when we record in the on-demand software, which I use called Novus, I do only keep them for 3 years. So I go in and delete anything older than 3 years in Novus because, as I've mentioned before, it's very important to remain consistent. Now with YouTube, I can't speak to YouTube because I'm not the one, Lisa is taking care of that. But it should remain consistent across the board. However, just because we delete it on YouTube doesn't mean that it's deleted. YouTube's deleted it. So, again, we should be deleting the meetings at all the same across each platform. It should be consistent.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Any other questions or comments? I did want to also thank Councilmember Adams for bringing this forward. This was certainly an initiative that I had worked on as well, and it brought into the budget process. So once we do that and we pass budget resolutions, although clearly city staff administers it, that does carry more weight than just being an administrative issue. So this does set this out. I would like to see within this resolution a retention period, and I think that Councilmember Folda has brought up a good point in this. My understanding of YouTube is that if you have created a channel, you can go in and delete stuff off of there as you feel fit to do. So I don't think there's anything in this resolution that addresses that directly, and I think that would be something that I would like to see as an amendment to it. Also, the 3-year period, that's the period of time specifically recommended by the state. Is that correct for records retention?
It is the adopted, approved retention schedule. So yes, that's a minimum period of time, but that's what we send up to the state, and the state has approved.
Okay. Again, I would like to see that period of time extended unless there is some issue with cost. Certainly storage costs have gotten to be far less than what they are just a few years ago. There's also a statement within this regarding the closed captioning. Do we have any idea what the closed captioning costs would be? Ms. LaPlante?
Mayor and council members. I did a little bit of research, and there's 2 different types of CART services available. There are the type, and that's the computer-aided recording. So there are 2 different types available. My estimates range anywhere from $20,000 a year to $75,000 a year based on which type of service we want, if we wanted during production or if we wanted post-production. I was only able to get one company to get back with me, and that was a company out of Chicago. They would hire somebody out here to do it for us. But she just gave me an hourly estimate. Based on the over 200 hours, it's possibly 220 to 250 hours of meetings a year that we now have. That was the cost that I came up with.
So I'm assuming that the streaming captioning or the immediate captioning is the more expensive one?
I believe actually it's the post-production that's even more expensive.
Because humans are still better than machines at doing that?
I think it has something to do with putting it into the system. I think it's easier for them to put it into the system as the meeting is going along. The post-production would require a different video element. At least my understanding is that you would have to go back into system like Final Cut Pro or InDesign and overlay the verbiage on the bottom. And that can take time. It's time consuming. It requires a different type of editing system. So that's why I believe the cost is so different if you were to do it post-production.
All right, thank you.
Mayor, may I speak to the records retention issue that you brought up? We're happy to extend that, but there is a process for that within our city code. In Title I, Chapter 8, there is an established records committee that consists of myself, the city attorney, and the finance director. And the purpose of the committee is to approve all records retention and disposition schedules. And what would happen is if you wanted a longer retention period on our videos, per our code, we can meet and certainly write up to the state and extend that if you'd want to give us an idea as to how long you think is appropriate to retain the videos.
Thank you. Again, I think then, you know, if we go into that area, that's something that can be addressed for records of all types at some point in the future. With these videos here, since the videos that are being uploaded to YouTube, it's been noted that something happens with property ownership. I don't see an issue with putting something into this resolution that there would be no deletions off of any non-city owned service.
I would
City
recommend
Attorney.
that any sort of retention conversation be agendized at a later time.
Yeah, and that's, I understand that, but we're talking about this right now. So, I mean, that's a problem when we get a resolution coming forward that does not address those types of things.
The resolution, if it's not ready to be acted upon, can be held in abeyance.
Okay. Councilmember Adams?
I certainly am amenable. I am all about increasing access. I think if we want to wait or hold off, it's not so much a concern as more of a question because I personally don't understand, and I think this is something that I think, the reason for this now is just to put this, like I said, as a starting point, and it's not the comprehensive thing. Originally, I had spoken to about costs for closed captioning, things like that, to try and get an understanding of what those might be. I felt that I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page here first, that this is something we wanted to go with. And then from there, we can start to address some of those things, because then we do start to get into real costs. My question with retention or posting of videos on YouTube and stuff is that because it's a third party, and I think this is a greater thing why we need to address this in a more comprehensive way, because they're a third party, there's no contractual obligations in the end. We might say something here, but then it doesn't really matter. I'm not sure if there's a limit to how many videos you can upload to YouTube, or if there's a size limit or anything like that. So maybe if there is a limit to that, and then the latest ones would get deleted in favor for the newest ones. These are questions I don't know. I'm not familiar. My intent here is not necessarily for the YouTube. I think it's important that we are posting it to platforms that are easily accessible, that do allow for closed captioning when available. But I think in general, I think we need to be. It is something that we need to look at in general, in greater depth and detail. So, like I said, this is the first step, just as a stopgap to make sure if there was ever any desire to change or end this, that we at least have that here. If it's council's desire to want to hold this off so we can be even more robust, that's fine. Like I said, my intention is to have this be the starting point, and to continue these conversations, and to bring forth things that might be a little bit more comprehensive in our overall approach to increasing accessibility.
Ms. LaPlante?
Just for the record, we've only been doing it for about 1.5 to 2 years, so it may be something that you want to look at further on down the road. If you wanted to approve it tonight, I don't see any reason why we couldn't move forward to it, and then perhaps an amendment to it later on would be fine. None of those videos are going anywhere because of the retention policy for at least another 1.5 years.
I would just point out, we could, I believe we could certainly amend this to say that there would be no action taken on the part of the city to remove any video from a third-party site once it's been uploaded. That's cost-free. It's understood that the third party makes their own rules. We have to abide by whatever rules they have. And then we can move on later to what the city does as far as retention policies. Any other questions or comments regarding that? Okay. Mr. Adams, it's your resolution. Please proceed.
Madam City Attorney, were you about to?
Yeah, I do have some concerns about such an amendment to the resolution at this point. I just think there needs to be more thought about the consequences of that, and just making that, and I don't think that, again, acting on this resolution today doesn't preclude you from revisiting the resolution in the future, and it doesn't preclude you from visiting other topics. The main purpose of this resolution before you today is to require the video recording as well as audio recording of public meetings. And so the as far as the posting on third-party websites and things like that, that is the city's practice, but the resolution does not necessarily require it or speak to that today. So I would just say it's somewhat, I would just recommend such an action be taken or considered at a later meeting when more time has been taken to understand the implications and things like that.
Well, I appreciate that input. The problem is that rarely happens, but again, it's Mr. Adams' resolution. Please proceed.
I appreciate that, and I am certainly open to continuing this conversation and expanding these services and looking into greater detail. With the concerns cited by the city attorney, I would like to move to approve resolution number 7229 as written at this time.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We'll now move to item number 8, appointment to ballot question committees.
At its regular meeting on December 8th, the council approved an advisory ballot question to be placed before the voters at the June 15th municipal general election. It was subsequently slightly amended at a later date, but as of right now, there's one ballot question going forward. And so we would like to get started on writing the arguments and rebuttals on those as soon as possible. Staff has been advertising for volunteers since December when the ballot question was first approved, and that has included placing ads on the city's social media pages. We put an ad in the Boulder City Review, we've put it in the utility mailer, and we've reached out to people who we've thought might have some intimate knowledge regarding this. As of this date, there was one volunteer that was included in your packet, Mr. Cody, and he is willing to write either the argument for or against. He was just willing to help. And then after the packet was published, Judy Deshane also offered to write an argument beyond the ballot question committee. She would prefer to write the arguments against passage of the question. And so each committee usually is comprised of 3 people, but if the council is unable to appoint 3 people willing to serve on the committee, you can appoint fewer than 3, but at least 1 to each. One advocating approval and 1 opposing approval. If the council fails to appoint a committee, the council can direct the city clerk in consultation with the city attorney to prepare the arguments advocating and opposing approval by the voters. So again, we have 2 volunteers, and we need to appoint the ballot question committee so we can get started on that, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. I had asked this in the briefing, and so just to clarify that, should there be something that happens with one of the members where they are not, fulfilling their duties as per the requirements of the thing, that then the result would be that the city clerk's office would then take up that position anyways, so that no matter what, there's always the backstop that the city clerk's office does handle these things, should there be any problems with the committees.
Yes, in consultation with the city attorney's office, that is correct.
And if there were, since we have only 2 individuals here, we could do 1 and 1. Should there be any reason that the city, that the council really wants to increase the size of these committees, could we add to that later? Or once these are created, those are the created positions, and we would not want any more people in there?
Well, it would be difficult because of the time frame we're already under. Whatever happens tonight, we get started tomorrow. So, but that's not to say that because anybody else that you would want on the committee would have to be appointed. So it's never happened before. That's not to say it can't happen, but it would be difficult, because what we do is we gather together and meet and we explain the question, we provide materials. And so, we have one conversation so everyone hears the same thing regardless of the question and regardless of what committee the people are on. And so we exchange contact information, we go over some ballot question rules. And so, can we do it? Yes, but it would be a little messy.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation. It was more of a curiosity out of my mind and how some of this works. So we don't do this too often. So I appreciate the information.
Any other questions or comments? Well, we'll open nominations then for the ballot question committee. Any nominations?
I'm sorry, Mayor, the committee advocating or opposing?
We'll go ahead with advocating for the pro side of it first.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bridges.
Yes, I would like to move to appoint Mr. Cody for advocating for.
Any other nominations for the pro position? We have a motion to close nominations.
Mayor, I move to close nominations.
Thank you. Mr. Cody then is selected for the pro position. Open nominations for the opposing position. Councilmember Hopkins?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Judy DeShane.
Thank you. Any other nominations? Okay. Anyone wishing to close nominations?
Mayor, I'll move to close the nominations.
All right. Ms. DeShane is therefore going to be the opposing side. Any other action required on this item, Madam City Clerk?
No, Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. We will then move to item number 9, presentation of the city manager's annual report.
Thank you, Mayor.
Which I may note that you were kind enough to save us from going much past midnight at our last meeting by holding to this meeting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is much earlier in the evening. So the city manager presents to the council at the beginning of each year an annual report. This year I wanted to highlight for the council and the community the results of the performance measurements tracked during fiscal year 20. This is the first year of complete data that staff has put together to respond to the task of collecting information for performance measurements. Fiscal year 20 began on January 1 of 2019 and concluded on June 30th of 2020. Peter Drucker, a management consultant and author, once said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Performance measures are a very important tool, a tool for staff to measure the performance of our functions in serving the community, a tool for the city council to see how the city is performing in different areas. And so what I'd like to do is highlight some of the performance measures over the various departments and then take any questions.
After the audio and video problems are resolved.
So with this slide, as you can see, the Administrative Service Department oversees IT. And it shows the number of hours the average response time was for each request per each quarter of fiscal year 20. They also track the full-time equivalent turnover rates, which were below 4% for fiscal year 20. Obviously, retaining qualified employees is always an important goal of any organization. And as you can see, we show the percentage of turnover rate for each quarter. Communication manager had set several goals in order to be responsive to the community and ensure information is getting out to our residents. The first goal was returning media requests within a 90-minute period, and this was accomplished throughout the fiscal year 20 on average 95% of the time. In addition, the objective was to get out a news release once per week. And for the last 3 quarters of fiscal year 20, this was accomplished 100% of the time. And then in addition to that, another goal was to make sure that 10 social media posts were generated each week. And as you can see with the information on the screen, this was achieved between 90 and 100% of the time for fiscal year 20. In community development, the department is always trying to track the number of permits, and it's important to note that as you can see with each quarter, we averaged at least 100 and approximately 20 permits on each quarter. But in particular, we wanted to note that with quarter 4, Q4, which was the final quarter of fiscal year 20, and during the midst of the pandemic, we were still able to issue 158 permits. You'll see a theme throughout this presentation regarding the continuity of service to our citizens and businesses even during the pandemic. The department also monitors the average number of days to review permits, which we do note that in that same 4th quarter did increase. This was during the time of transition when we had closed city offices to the public and had converted to requesting that all permits be submitted electronically. And so this added additional initial time to that process, but we're looking forward to reviewing the data for fiscal year 21 to see how that's improved over that time. Our economic development coordinator helped on average 30 businesses per quarter. This can be activities from ranging to helping them with a business license, helping them with a building permit, providing general information on how to conduct business with the city. And you will note that in Q4, again, coinciding with the first quarter of COVID, there was an increase in his support to our businesses, understandably, as our businesses were suffering from the pandemic. Code enforcement remained consistent with cases throughout fiscal year 20. This slide highlights the fire department. And as Chief Gray has noted in prior presentations, the majority of calls for service are medical for the fire department. And for fiscal year 20, that was 79% of the calls that the fire department received. Finance department has kept very busy throughout fiscal year 20 processing accounts payable and accounts receivable invoices. As you can see from the graph, over 2,500 each quarter. In fiscal year 20, the Finance Department saved our taxpayers over $2 million through the bidding process for projects over $100,000. So this indicates a significant savings to the community through the bidding process. In Parks and Rec, part of their responsibility is managing our golf courses. And the golf courses saw a fairly consistent number of rounds played at both courses through fiscal year 20. Even during COVID in Q4, as people were seeking outdoor recreation activities, this despite the fact that the courses were shut down for 6 weeks during Q4. As you can see, the numbers remain fairly consistent, even taking that into consideration. Parks and Rec Department plays an important role in facilitating recreation, aquatic, and sport activities for our children and adult residents. Q4 was negatively impacted by COVID as facilities and activities were shut down, as you can see from the slide. But for the other 3 quarters, fairly consistent participation rate among the different program activities. The police department tracks crime data using the uniform crime reports published by the FBI. This includes Part 1 property crimes, motor vehicle theft and burglary as examples, and Part 1 violent crimes, for example, robbery and assault. And as you can see with the data that was collected for fiscal year 20, and as I know to change from your slides, the final quarter of fiscal year 19, we have fairly consistent data. There was a spike in property crimes in Q2 of fiscal year 20, which coincides with the holiday season, and as noted by the police chief, saw an increase in theft of packages at doorsteps. And so that was a consideration that was taken into account there. And corresponding to that, we have tracking the 911 generated calls for those 3 same quarters. But I think the most important metric and performance measurement for Boulder City as it relates to crime is our designation as the safest community in Nevada. This is from the National Council of Home Safety and Security, and really is an acknowledgement of our police department's service to our citizens, our businesses, by retaining this designation. Public Works Department, one of their performance measures is to track the number of bids awarded each quarter. They also track city vehicle and equipment serviced each quarter, which, according to our Public Works Director, tends to be cyclical, as you see that downward trend throughout fiscal year 20. The Public Works staff is very busy responding to work order requests that are generated by either the public or their fellow employees. And as you can see, the level of activity for each quarter of fiscal year 20, we have highlighted the categories of administration, streets, building maintenance, and landscaping, and you can see significant activity throughout each of those quarters through that fiscal year. For our utilities department, one of their performance measures is to avoid violations in the areas of safe drinking water, water treatment, and landfill. And as you can see with the slide, there were 0 violations throughout all 4 quarters of fiscal year 20. Also another note, clarification, one of the other things that they track is the number of complaints, and electric complaints were on average 1 per quarter. And clarification from your material and the slide on the screen, landfill complaints per quarter was averaging about 10. While these measures only track city performance at the beginning of the pandemic, it does reflect staff's commitment of continuity of service to our customers while responding to the crisis. And I just want to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of our employees during this past year that rose the challenge of the pandemic while continuing to serve our customers, which are the citizens and businesses of our community. And I will take any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, I have a few comments. First of all, I want to say that I really like when you call them customers, not just residents, that these are customers. And I want to congratulate all the departments for committing to continuous improvement. I did want to ask you, so what improvements can you see? Where do you see those gaps in being able to do better or do the better? I don't know how you're going to do better, but what kind of gaps do you see that, say, getting to a specific metric or something of that nature?
Well,
Yep.
first off, there's always the opportunity for improvement. And so as we continue to collect this data, and as we compare the same quarters over time, then that takes into consideration cyclical changes and can be measures for how we can improve the processes that are in place. For example, as we in the Community Development Department measure the length of time it takes to turn around the first set of building permit plans, if we're seeing an increase over time, particularly within the same quarter of each fiscal year, that's an indication that we need to revisit the processes that we have in place to try to reduce that turnaround time. Over the last couple of years, for example, we have tried to improve communication and resources to our customers so that it minimizes the length of time that the department reviews those plans. And that in particular is really a multi-department effort. Building permits are reviewed by Public Works, Utility, Fire, as well as the Community Development Department.
I just wanted to say, not only do I appreciate the continuous improvement, I appreciate from all the departments that I've had a question for, whether a resident has asked a question and I'd like to get an answer right away, or to ask my own question, I get immediate response. I'm really impressed with the folks in our different departments, the directors and other employees. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. So, obviously COVID-19 was a big thing, and we're really just looking at, we say fiscal year 20, but that's the end of 2019, the end of the beginning of 2020. Was there anything that stood out or surprised you in what we were seeing or how we were having to respond earlier on, as opposed to, I know you are only in this acting position recently, but even in your role as a community development director, what were some of the surprises and what were some of the challenges that were unexpected? Obviously, all of COVID-19 was unexpected, but there's always these things that we don't anticipate that maybe now we have a better understanding of so that we can address them better in the future.
Well, I think certainly, and as you noted, Councilmember Adams, that we only have one quarter that was impacted by COVID in this data. It's going to be interesting to see fiscal year 21. But the fact that the city quickly adapted and responded to continue to serve our customers despite the challenges that were presented with COVID, despite the additional responsibilities that were taken on by all of our departments, and the unique challenges with just conducting business. And so I was very pleased to see with that quarter's measure, consistency in operations.
And with the number of complaints I'm sorry. With the number of complaints for the landfill being 10, I noticed the other one 0, 0, 0, 1, and then there's 10. 10 within a year still seems like a small number, but what was there a common complaint that was being addressed, or what was why 10 when every other one seems to be next to none?
Well, and just to clarify, that was per quarter average. But as to what the specific complaint was, I would have to follow up and get back to you on that after checking with our utilities director.
I'm just curious if it's one common complaint, because then that might be something easier to address, or whether it's many disparate things that are happening, and whether or not that's been consistent from past year to previous year. Because I think I think you said it. You need a measure in order to see how good you're doing. It's one thing to look at a snapshot here at this year, but it's important to look at how do those numbers compare previously, and then of course looking forward, how will those numbers compare, and always making sure that we are working towards improving. And so when we see numbers that might stand out, like I said, I'm not sure if that stands out for just this year or these quarters versus previous ones, or if that's expected or normal for us to expect. And so what can we do to start to bring that down and really try to keep streamlining everything. So I do appreciate all the work, and I absolutely appreciate all the as has been stated, staff has been quick to respond to a number of questions, especially recently. So I appreciate all the hard work that staff is doing.
Thank you.
Questions or comments? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. So on slide 90, on page 90, it's the risk and management, purchasing and risk management. So I think it's 13 on your slide. I had a question on the savings for formal bids. I'm just wondering, what is that savings over? Is that savings versus what was budgeted, or savings versus highest bid, or how did those numbers come?
Yeah, so that was based on previous projects being bidded out and going through this process, how much that saved the city in those contracts.
Okay. Versus what was budgeted?
Now, I think based on previous awards for those types of either bids. So the point is, by going through this process, it demonstrates how we're able to save the city money by taking these projects out to bid.
Okay. So it's saying that it's been beneficial that we have formal bids for our projects.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Thank you. The next question I had was about our crimes. It's slide 16 and 17. So I guess we'll start with the incident calls. I noticed that those went down in quarter 3, where the property and violent crimes went higher in quarter 3. So are those incident calls solely 911 calls, or are those also calls to our non-emergency number that are being charted there?
That is calls just to 911. We also have a separate measure for calls of service.
Okay. So that would probably make up for the higher in quarter 3, more property calls probably that aren't recorded. They wouldn't be necessarily a 911 call.
Well, and I think, and this is one of the things the chief pointed out to me, when we have such small numbers like this, so going from 25 to 44, it looks like a significant increase. But in terms of volume for the entire quarter for these types of crimes, you could have one individual that could create that spike.
Okay. It's sort of related. A couple of years ago, I think there was a neighborhood watch kind of group that I know Chief Shea reached out with to try to teach neighborhoods how to help look out for one another. You know, and you noted that in the last quarter there, it was a lot of the property crimes were due to stolen packages, things like that in nature. It would, I would like to see if we could start that up again, and once we're able to assemble again, to help. I think I do see that a lot with neighborhoods helping each other. If they saw something, they say something, or they provide video. If they saw a neighbor had a need for, you know, what happened to my car at 3 a.m. But just really trying to, once again, connect each other to help look out for one another, and just be a little more organized about doing so. So if that's something that we could do in the future again, hopefully one day we can assemble again in bigger groups to do something like that. So I think that was only, and one last question on your work orders. You have them broken up. This is on slide 21. They're broken up by streets, building maintenance, landscape, and administration. What would be an administration work order?
So if there is some type of work that needs to be done as a generating of a report, whereas you've got more of, you know, obviously landscaping is self-explanatory, building maintenance and streets, that would include those types of general items that are being asked of the Public Works Department to follow up on.
Okay. So more, within the office, more administration. Okay,
Yep.
Of Public Works. Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, thank you. On the type of calls, the 285, would that include complaints where people would call in to complain about dogs barking or whatever?
For 911, yes.
Yes, but do we track the number of calls, complaint calls that we get in?
Calls of service, we do, yes. And I can certainly share that information with the council as well.
Well, I didn't see it in here, but that would be fine. And there was a question that came up. I think at one time we were not doing any violations if cars were parked on the street too long because of COVID. Are we still doing that?
Yeah, the police chief, because of the other responsibilities of the police department, has still been limited in his ability to follow up with that. But hopefully that will be something that can change soon.
Okay, thank you.
You know, again, we've seen it over this past year, the outstanding job that city staff has done, you know, people filling in at functions that were required only because of the pandemic. You know, again, an outstanding job, in my opinion, of what staff has been doing. A couple of thoughts on things, the 911 calls, 911 calls. With those dropping, you know, I know early on in the pandemic, and certainly we've seen the amount of stress that people are under. I would also like to say thank you to our community for bearing all of what's happened with this. There was real concern when this first began that we were going to see things happen, family disturbances, vandalism calls, that type of thing. And at least from these raw numbers, again, I want to thank the community as well for holding up as well as they have under this. With, again, going back to the 911 calls, you know, something that I've asked about for at least 2 years is to get something available to the public regarding crime reporting. And I do see that Chief Shea has indicated that they've now completed this changeover to a new system. So hopefully then we can get something so that it can be displayed out to our residents to show where things are happening. Councilmember Folda mentioned the Neighborhood Watch. That's a great tool for those type of efforts for Neighborhood Watch to understand, are there burglaries occurring, vandalism occurring, what might be happening in their neighborhoods. So I'd like to see that hopefully move forward. Landfill, 10 complaints per quarter. I know one I hear is irregularity of hours. In other words, somebody says, well, I loaded up my truck and I drove out there Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock and the gate was already locked. So that's one I've heard a few times before. With the Public Works showing the work orders, you know, we've now had the C-Click Fix in use by our residents for, I believe it's been over a year now. Having that broken out separately from the other work orders that Public Works gets, I think, again, would be helpful to our residents to see the good job that is occurring. You know, that's things that people can report, you know, maybe a street light is out or there's a pothole somewhere that needs to be repaired. I know it's been a little while since I've seen numbers on that, but the city employees have a good record of responding to those and taking care of those issues. And to be able to have that information available, I think would show the public how well they're doing on taking care of those types of things. Other than that, I would say that in consideration of a worldwide pandemic, these are good numbers and they show the great job that our city staff, volunteers, everybody has been pitching in on. So thank you for your report.
Thank you all very much.
All right, that brings us to item number 10, public comment. Public comment during this portion of the meeting may be on any item. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes for their comments. And as always, we request people be civil and concise. Anyone wishing to make public comment during our final public comment period, the phone number is 702-589-9629.
Yes, I have public comment.
Go ahead.
Yes, good evening, Council. For the record, Fred Volts. I wanted to react to a few of the comments that were made about the resolution you passed earlier tonight regarding capital projects. A couple of the missing pieces of information we most definitely need to make intelligent decisions. We need to know what the total available budget, whether it's the utilities area or special projects, is. And that should be shown on the bottom of the spreadsheet that's generated. Similarly, we need to know what the total available cash is, not the budget. We need both of those pieces. They're two different numbers. Regarding the $20 million of missing money that the mayor alluded to in his comments, we still don't know where that money is between operating cash and capital project cash. And this was brought up in a December 23rd meeting with several city staff as something that needed to be followed up on, along with 5 other items. A request for status update was made about 2 weeks ago. There's been absolutely no word from anybody about what progress they're making on the 6 items that needed to be addressed for both accounting and reporting issues. So I would encourage more work in this area. We're still not there yet. Tonight's spreadsheet is helpful, but it still doesn't give a complete picture of what we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you. The phone line is now available. The phone number to call for our final public comment period is 702-589-9629. And this is our final public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak, the phone number is 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, did we have any emails or voicemails for the final public comment?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
This is from Tanya Vici. I am writing in support of the city clerk. There are many citizens who don't agree with the recent move the mayor has put into motion with regards to the city clerk. I would dare to say this action is retaliation of a whistleblower if I wasn't privy to the premeditated discussion to out the city clerk years ago. Yes, years ago at one of the first BCCA meetings held at the Boulder City Library, I remember the removal of the city clerk being part of the then running for council, Mr. McManus's agenda. I guess the then city council candidate and now mayor has held true to his word with this latest move. The voice of all Boulder City residents should be fairly reflected in every decision made by the council. And while the BCCA is entitled to its opinions, the unfair seated saturation of BCCA members on the council, 2 of which were appointed by the very man they championed to elect, is not acting in the interest of all of the citizens, and in my opinion hasn't for a long time. Just because the city charter gives the council the responsibility to supervise the city's officers doesn't mean this is the will of the people. The side agendas, the time and money spent to seemingly out anyone with a difference of opinion, or in this case, remove the city clerk who is not only doing her job, but has meticulously done so for over a decade, is exhausting. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. I am greatly disappointed in our leadership. It seems the motivation to control growth has transitioned from a platform to get elected to a one-sided operation that doesn't care what or who it ruins. Our focus needs to be on bigger issues such as helping our small business community survive and thrive during this awful pandemic, not these petty power plays. I urge the mayor to show that he can serve the will of all the people by rethinking the action of requesting a special hearing to fire the city clerk. There is always an opportunity to do the right thing. Tanya Vici. This is from Jody Miller. Enough is enough. No firing of Lorene Crum. Can we stop jeopardizing the integrity of BC? I've lived here 20 plus years. We are going downhill. No firing. This is from Francesca Bosco, who called to say she is a 41-year resident of Boulder City and supports the termination of Lorene Crum. This is from Roxanne Day. Dear City Council, I am writing to express my opposition to the possible firing of City Clerk Lorene Crum. Ms. Crum has been an asset to Boulder City for many years. She is professional, competent, and provides excellent guidance to the council. I am very concerned that the current mayor may feel it is okay to fire someone for disagreeing with him. That is not the intent of at-will provisions in employment contracts. When is this behavior going to stop? There has been an us versus them relationship with city staff from day one. This is not how you successfully run a city. People who disagree with you are not the enemy. Successful leaders welcome varied input from staff so they can make the best decisions. It should not be viewed as a threat to your authority and responsibilities as elected officials. I also find the timing questionable and offensive. During this global pandemic, doesn't the City Council have other priorities? We are also in the middle of an election. This is not the time to fire your knowledgeable city clerk. Many people in this town are tired of the politics of personal destruction and lack of civility that have become a part of Boulder City politics. Many of us used to be more involved but have been checked out for some time. Because of this proposal to fire a competent city clerk, many of us now are checking back in. I am expressing my opposition to this proposed action, and I implore the other council members to not allow it to move forward. Sincerely, Roxanne Day. This is from Roger Tobler. I am writing to voice my opposition in removing Lorene Crum as city clerk. Once again, the mayor and those who support this effort are certainly not looking out for the best interests for this community. We are entering an election, and your plan is to remove the one city official, the election officer, that has vast knowledge and experience in making sure our elections run smoothly. Lorene has been an outstanding city clerk who is very well respected in this community. She definitely has greater knowledge in procedural issues regarding agendas and elections than any one of the council members. I was in office for 3 terms, and I received more compliments regarding Lorene than anyone else at City Hall. She has always had outstanding reviews from former councils. I don't believe this current council has even held a review until now, which is obviously a scam to remove her. This council has 2 appointed members and an election coming up very soon. The fair approach and the best approach would be to let the next city council, who will all be elected, make the decision regarding the city clerk. The 2 that are appointed should step away from this. You have no mandate from this community to make this important decision. Once again, Lorene is always professional and has carried out her responsibilities. Many people are watching, and this will become an issue in the upcoming elections as well as the next. I hope all of you take a fair and truthful approach in dealing with a city officer that has dedicated many years to making Boulder City a wonderful place. Roger Tobler. And that is the end of the public comments.
Thank you. Again, this is our final public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak, the phone number is 702-589-9629. All right, hearing no others, we will close the public comment period and move to council reports. Councilmember Folda.
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing to report this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Hoskins.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I attended a workforce connection meeting today where Commissioner Marilyn Kirkpatrick gave a presentation, and we accepted and approved a grant fund from the Nevada DHHS in the amount of $791,440 for Nevada Youth First Pilot, Child Care, Education, Recreation, Career Pathway. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bridges.
Yes, I have a couple. First of all, I had the opportunity to watch the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance meeting online this morning. It was very interesting. Fellow Michael Brown talked about small businesses and how to avoid the situation again, and the concern of having 20% employment down here in the south versus 5% up in the north in Reno. Most interesting to me was Melody Rose, the chancellor of the Nevada State Higher Education, She talked about stackable low-cost credentials through colleges, training people to be employable, workforce development, short course certifications. I thought all of those were very interesting. But most interesting was the presentation given by Rafi. He did a wonderful job. I even sent him a compliment. He shed great light on Boulder City, and I was very impressed. And I also was surprised of Joe Hardy talking about renewable energy and what we have going for us, our greatest asset, the sun. Okay, that's on that topic. The other thing, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I want to discuss EABC for just a minute. Nobody in Boulder City should be evicted or have their power shut off due to current financial circumstances. Emergency aid can help you with these situations and offers help for child care, for distance education, and food. So Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday from 9 to 12. And it's by appointment only. And that's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. I recently had a Board of Health meeting, though they're always about 2 weeks before the next council meeting, so the information's always a little outdated, and we know in 2 weeks' time a lot of that information can change. But a big part of the conversation that was being had was the difficulty in getting the vaccinations out into the community. We have the capacity to potentially vaccinate close to 100,000 people weekly. We simply don't have the supply. I think as the city continues to administer its vaccination program, I know there are some in the community who are painfully aware that we had some disruptions that resulted in needing to reschedule their vaccine appointments. But I want to be clear that that was not the result of failures on city staff's part or failures of the fire department or the EOC. I mean, they really are working very hard to vaccinate our community in an efficient manner. I've stayed in close contact with acting city manager Michael Mays and fire chief Gray just to make sure that I'm keeping up to date on these matters. It's very important, especially as we start to talk about schools opening up and as we try to start looking forward into the future, that we can see that the horizon is there, but we need to be patient. It's very, very difficult. These are issues that not just the Southern Nevada community is experiencing or Boulder City is experiencing. This is obviously happening throughout the country and throughout the world. So we will do everything that we can to vaccinate our community in an efficient manner, in a way that is in line with the rest of the community, and that's going to be difficult, and there are going to be bumps in the road, unfortunately. But I have hope and faith that things will start to smooth out and that we will be getting there, hopefully sooner than later. So that's all I really have to report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to talk about the compliments that I've heard from residents about the vaccination program. Certainly we hit a rough spot last week. The numbers that come to the city come on a weekly basis as far as how many vaccines we can expect. The number that we had been indicated we could expect did not arrive. It was reduced by about 75%. That obviously causes a lot of work for city staff, but it causes a lot of stress for people whose appointments were canceled. But of those folks who have been through the process now, they have been extremely complimentary on the professionalism, the efficiency, the pleasantness of everybody who's been involved in this. Certainly the fire department has a big role in it. The nursing staff and other healthcare workers from our hospital have also been doing a tremendous amount, and volunteers in the community. I know we have some who had retired from their professions because of emergency directives that Governor Sisolak had set out. They've been able to help in this process as well. So this has really been a community effort. All you have to do is turn on the news and you can see how much of a problem there is with not having enough supply of doses of the vaccine for the number of people that need to be vaccinated. I was at a Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority meeting this morning. They are also doing the second doses for people in Clark County. I've had staff tell me that, they've seen people crying, not because of any pain from the shot, but just the relief that comes with knowing these vaccinations are being done. And with that meeting for the Convention and Visitors Authority, they're looking at the first show in June of this year. It's called Concrete World, and it's one of the larger shows. They understand, everyone understands, that getting these vaccines out is going to be the thing that gets our economy back on its feet. It's going to relieve the stress that all of us have, and all I would say is please be patient with us. As Councilmember Adams had said just earlier, our folks are doing the job as quickly and efficiently as they can. They've been doing an outstanding job at it, and my sincere appreciation to everyone involved in this. Thank you, and we are adjourned.